today's Farm Bill Coalition webinar hosted by the National Congress of the American Indians. The Native Farm Bill Coalition is a newly formed effort of intertribal organizations and tribal nations who are ready to advocate for Indian country's inclusion in the next Farm Bill. I'd like to acknowledge our Native Farm Bill Coalition partners for working with us so far. The Shakopee, Mdewakanton, Sioux community, the Intertribal Agriculture Council, and the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative out of the University of Arkansas. And I'd also like to thank all of the tribes that have joined the Native Farm Bill Coalition. At our last count, we have 22 tribal nations that have joined our coalition, and we're thankful for all of them. We know that many more tribes and regional organizations will be joining our efforts soon. And we'd like to get this webinar started. Again, my name is Maria Gibbons. I'm a member of the Coeur d'Alene tribe in northern Idaho, and I'm a policy analyst at NCAI. And we're joined today by a number of great presenters. Chris Georgakis from Goff Public, representing the Shakopee, Mdewakanton, Sioux community. Ross Racine, the Executive Director of the Intertribal Agriculture Council, Zach Ducheneau, Program Manager and Secretary for the Intertribal Agriculture Council, Phil Bakershank from Holland and Knight, Janie Sims-Hipp, the Director of the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, and Colby Duran, also with the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative. And then I'd like to turn it over to Ross Racine with the Intertribal Agriculture Council.
Well, good morning. Well, I guess it's good morning to those to the west. Thank you to those who interrupted their lunch in the mountain. And good afternoon to those in the east. This is an excellent opportunity, and I think Shakopee has provided us Shakopee has presented us with an excellent opportunity and an exciting opportunity from my perspective. Having worked on every farm bill since 1990, when Indians for the first time was mentioned in a farm bill, and I think we were mentioned in a total of 3 places. So building on that, the IAC has been pretty much the standalone organization that has worked on farm bills since that point in time. We had some activity in 2002, 2008 on the nutrition titles from other groups, but this represents the first time that Indian country has really attempted to impact a farm bill in all of the titles. And to me, this represents a huge opportunity, but it also is a huge undertaking because with the documents that have been prepared to date, only represent a small portion of the work yet in front of us. And it's exciting to have Indian country voice rise up to be heard, as we do not enjoy the caucuses that, say, the Black Caucus or the Hispanic Caucus enjoys in Congress. So this coalition provides us a little stronger voice as we attempt to impact this farm bill. And to me, that's a great opportunity. And I thank you for the opportunity to participate with you all today. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris to talk about some of the basics.
Thank you, Ross. And Maria, if we could just go back to the previous slide. The Regaining Our Future report was an outgrowth of conversations that the Shakopee, Mdewakanton, and Sioux community had with the Intertribal, or I should say both the Intertribal Agriculture Council and the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative right after last year's election, and looking at the Farm Bill as one of the largest and most far-reaching domestic pieces of legislation. And given the fact that there's been a tremendous surge in interest in Native communities about food, foodways, nutrition, the importance that Native producers are increasingly playing in tribal economies and economies in Native communities, it really seemed an appropriate time to take an assessment of the risks and opportunities that exist in the 2018 Farm Bill. So about a year ago, at this time, Janie Hipp and Colby Duran, from whom you will hear in a few minutes, were commissioned to produce a report making an assessment of what was really at risk to Indian country in the upcoming Farm Bill. It is a very, very in-depth report. Both NCAI and the Intertribal Ag Council played indispensable roles in helping create this report. The report, as you see on the slide, is available for download at the seedsandnativehealth.org website. And it's a report that was commissioned by the Shakopee, Mdewakanton, and Sioux community as part of their Seeds of Native Health campaign to improve Native American nutrition and food access. If we can go to the next slide, Maria. Once the report was released at NCAI's mid-year conference last June, we got initially tremendous feedback from tribal leaders, from a number of observers of federal nutrition and agriculture policy, and very encouraging early reviews from members of Congress. And it really seemed that there was an opportunity to do something more in support of advancing Indian country's interests around the Farm Bill as a result of the response to that report. And over the course of last summer, Intertribal Ag Council, Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, NCAI, and Shakopee talked about the possibility of building a temporary coalition to both defend Native Americans' interests in the Farm Bill and also to look for opportunities to advance the interests of tribal governments, Native producers, and others who are concerned with the broad implications of the Farm Bill. So in the course of last summer and fall, we framed out really the goals and purpose of a Native Farm Bill Coalition. We launched it officially at NCAI's annual conference 2 months ago. We were gratified to see such strong interest on the part of tribal leaders at the coalition, and as Maria mentioned at the top of the call, we've been glad to see a number of tribes that have already officially joined the coalition. Many, many more are in the process of doing so. And I wanted to just mention just a few benefits to tribes, to intertribal organizations, as well as other Native organizations and non-Native organizations who share our concerns about the Farm Bill and its impact on Indian country. There are no dues, no financial obligations for any tribe or organization to join the coalition. The purpose in asking for membership is that we want to carry a more unified voice from Indian country into the halls of Congress than we've ever seen before. And as Ross mentioned a few moments ago, really from 1990 forward, there's been oftentimes lonely effort launched by the Intertribal Ag Council and NCAI to influence the Farm Bill. And we're hoping that this coming year we will see Indian country represented in a chorus of action and ideas that we've never seen before. The benefits of membership include our ability through Intertribal Ag Council to provide customized analysis of tribes' financial stake in the current Farm Bill, which will be useful background information for tribal leaders, access to policy, research, and advocacy materials that the coalition is putting together, assistance with questions that the staff either at the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative or IAC can provide. We want the involvement of members in helping shape the legislative agenda of the coalition, which includes setting priorities and making sure that interests that are shared among tribes or interests that are unique to certain tribes are given voice. We are going to be providing to coalition members regular email updates, and we're happy to do that to send it to tribal leaders, staff, lobbyists, attorneys, and others designated by members. There are going to be a number of national meetings and fly-ins to Washington and activities at upcoming NCAI, NIGA, and other national gatherings where we will have specific Native Farm Bill Coalition events. We're also going to be asking those tribes that have lobbying representation in Washington, D.C. to allow their lobbyists to join the discussions and the coordinated efforts of the Native Farm Bill Coalition's lobbying team. So there are a number of benefits. Again, there is no financial obligation. We're hoping that tribes will send a resolution or a letter from their tribal leadership to us. You see the email address that's at the bottom of the slide in front of you, info@nativefarmbillcoalition.org. We're happy to answer your questions in advance of sending us that official indication of membership, and we look forward to having questions answered either on this webinar or shortly thereafter. Let me just point out one other thing too, which is that we have future webinars scheduled for January 8th and January 28th next month. We'll look at that as an opportunity to share new information on subject matter, sort of getting into the weeds on certain key topics, as well as sharing information about where Congress is at in the development of the Farm Bill. So with that, Maria, be glad to turn it back to you.
All right, everyone. I'm sorry that we had a few little technical difficulties with no audio at the very beginning, so I wanted to introduce myself again. My name is Maria Gibbons. I'm a member of the Coeur d'Alene tribe in northern Idaho, and I'm a policy analyst here at NCAI hosting the webinar. So I apologize for the lack of audio at the very beginning, but we're very happy that you all have joined us. We have representatives from the Intertribal Agriculture Council. Just speaking was Chris Georgicus from the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community. And we also have the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative out of the University of Arkansas Law School joining us. And so I wanted to turn it back over to the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative to talk about the basics of the Farm Bill. So Colby or Janie, would you mind?
Sure.
Colby?
Thank you, Maria. Yes. Thank you, Maria. My name is Colby Dern. I'm the Policy Director with the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative. And we also have our Initiatives Director, Janie Sims-Hip, on with us as well. I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the basics of the Farm Bill, what it kind of holds, what some of the potential opportunities are, and how we can really see that it could have a really big impact for tribal governments and tribal producers and tribal communities. We think the Farm Bill really holds the potential for tribal governments and producers to be able to feed their own people in tribal food systems with foods that are being made by by tribal producers. And all of this can help spur economic development, build some of the critical infrastructure which is lacking in a lot of the communities, and be able to support traditional foods and also improve the health, nutrition, food access, and food security. And so the Farm Bill itself, probably the best way to put it is how it was described by President Obama the last time it was passed in 2014, is it's really a Swiss Army knife, is it has the potential to do so many different things. There's money and grants and other programs that are there for research. There's, of course, the health and nutrition title, which we're going to go into in pretty good depth today to talk about the importance of that. There's also money for building out infrastructure for rural water systems. That also includes broadband and housing, community facilities, buildings as well, which is a very important program. Conservation is also a large part of the Farm Bill title, as well as forestry. And a lot of these programs also act as safety nets for farmers and food producers for that. So the Farm Bill really has the potential to do a lot of different things. You can go to the next slide, please, Maria. So the last Farm Bill was passed in 2014. The Farm Bill itself is usually a 5-year bill. They pass it every 5 years. Ross will tell you that they haven't done a Farm Bill on time in the last, I think, 4 Farm Bills. But the last time the Farm Bill was passed, it was $489 billion bill over that time period. And so it expires in September 2018. And when I say expires, there are some programs that do continue in perpetuity, as that's how they're authorized and they're subject to the general appropriations part. But the Farm Bill, unlike if you are familiar with the Child Nutrition Reauthorization, which has some programs at USDA, it actually does have a trigger in it which requires Congress to act. Otherwise, some of the different price supports change and actually revert back to their 1938 and 1941 levels. So it really tries to make a way and ensure that Congress does something to be able to address some of the changes in agriculture, because agriculture can be can fluctuate a lot over time. So it needs to be addressed hopefully every 5 years. Within that, it includes all different programs for commodity, crop insurance, conservation, trade, nutrition, credit, rural development, research, forestry, energy, and horticulture, or fruit and vegetables, or specialty crops. And as you can see, if you look at the overall funding of the Farm Bill itself, the 2014 Farm Bill, about 80% of it was dedicated to nutrition. And that's mostly the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, which was the renamed Food Stamp Program. But also out of the SNAP funding is the funding for the Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations, or FDIPR, which is the commodity food program in Indian country for folks that don't have the ability to be able to redeem SNAP benefits. And because of that amount of money in the Farm Bill, the nutrition title ends up being sometimes the most contentious part of the bill, and actually will generate a lot of the debates just because it has most of the money in it. And so that's some of the things that we'll talk about when we go into the nutrition title specifically. If you can go to the next slide, Maria. So why does the Farm Bill matters? When the Congressional Budget Office looks at legislation, they score it on a 10-year period. When they scored the 2014 Farm Bill, they said it could have a $956 billion impact. And why that's really important is that really makes the Farm Bill as being one of the only truly rural development-focused pieces of legislation. It's also the second largest spending bill that Congress passes that's not defense. And so being able to have that access to money for any country and for rural areas in this country are critically important, because there's not a lot of programs that are specifically focused or targeted to reach out to that. Also, the Farm Bill is very important because it actually is a pretty interesting partnership between rural and urban members of Congress that's existed for about 40 years since our original food stamp program in 1973. And so really what they're looking to do is to be able to have urban members who had a lot of members interested in getting food support to be able to vote for a bill that was mostly focused for rural folks and rural food producers. And so that's sort of been a pretty good coalition and partnership that's existed so far, it does come into some types of issues as well. The nutrition title really is price support for crops, and so a lot of times there's talk about moving and splitting the Farm Bill apart and moving the nutrition title out of it and just focusing on farm programs. They tried that in the 2014 Farm Bill in the House, and the farm-only Farm Bill actually failed on the floor by a pretty large margin. And so there's a lot of talk of making sure that you don't separate the idea of producing food and growing food away from the feeding people, because all of those things are incredibly important to being able to make sure the programs work. USDA in the last week also released a report and said about 1 in 5 households in rural America receive federal food assistance. So you're starting to see some of the dynamics of food insecurity and food systems changing a little bit. And so kind of changing the conversation regarding who receives food assistance in this. So what could the 2018 Farm Bill potentially mean? It could what we're projecting, and our and Ross and Zach at IAC have been talking about this number. It could mean $1 trillion to Indian country into rural areas. So it's an incredible amount of money over a 10-year period that could really go to help build out infrastructure and support food producers. If you can go to the next slide, Maria. So this map is just really here for just for reference. This is a map of where tribes are located in the United States. I just want to point this out so it's easier to show with some of the other ones. So if you can go to the next slide, Maria. What you see here, this is a map of where there are food deserts throughout the country, and this is not having access to transportation or to a place store within 10 miles or so. As you can see, they pretty much fall along some of the same areas where tribal communities and tribal reservations are and tribes are located. They're all within those same type of areas. And if you can please go to the next slide, Maria. So while we know that there's lack of food access, this map shows where food is grown in Indian country, and it's along the same exact areas. So what we think we can really address in this Farm Bill is that disconnect between why is food being grown and produced in areas and then being sent out for further processing somewhere else, and then coming back as a commodity food package or in some other form, rather than staying in there. And I think through the Farm Bill and the Farm Bill programs, there's a really strong way to be able to build up food access, food production, further food processing, and other ways to support tribal communities and tribal governments and tribal producers' ability to be able to expand business, be able to feed people in the areas, and to be able to employ more people. If you can go to the next slide. So the next slide shows what we know of the snapshot of what farming and ranching in Indian country looks like right now. These numbers are from the agriculture census, which happens every 5 years. And the last one was in 2012. As you can see, some of the numbers from farm operators have gone down, while the acres operated has been about the same. However, if you look at how much acres that native farmers have in production, it's 57 million acres. And on average, the average acres per operation is larger, as it has grown in size, even though the number of producers has gone down. Some of the numbers for it, agriculture in Indian country is about a $3.2 billion industry. You can look at some of the different numbers that for payments and expenses for that. But if you go to the next slide, we just pulled a couple of things to show some of the average farm payments to show how there's another disconnect between that. If you look at just a couple of the sample sizes, particularly in Arizona, Nevada, and Utah, the average native-run farm size is over 3 times larger than that of all farms in that same area. And despite having farms that are 3 times larger, the average farm payment for native farms is about $80,000 less per farm. And if you look at North and South Dakota, again, about 1,000 acre difference in the size of farms for native run farms. But despite being almost 1,000 yards, despite being 1,000 acres larger, you can still see there's a discrepancy of about $1,000 in payments being received. And what's interesting about the ag census numbers and the numbers of the map of where food is produced in Indian country, we know, and this is something that USDA acknowledges, that those numbers of native farmers and producers is undercounted by at least half. So we don't have a full accurate view of this yet, but we can truly start to see how it's shaping up. But we do know that Indian country's agriculture has even a larger footprint than what it's already showing, even larger than the $3.3 billion. And by being able to increase access to programs and being able to build out some of the infrastructure components and increasing eligibility for programs and access to credit, you're really able to start to build out more and more of this type of economic activity in Indian country. So if you go on to the next slide, this shows what the current version, Farm Bill titles are. There's 12 of them. I won't read them all aloud, although you can see them up there as well. So they're all over there. We'll point out that there is a miscellaneous title, just if there's anything that the first 11 didn't catch. In that one is a lot of some of the cross-cutting issues that may hit more than one of the titles. So those programs are kind of consolidated into there, and that's so that one's a pretty important one to be able to do there. But if you go through all of them, there's a lot of different parts that are really important as well. And if you go to the next slide, we actually took a look at all of them and broke them into 5 key areas to really kind of showcase what USDA programs and Farm Bill programs have. Including with that is business and economic development through the commodities, trade, credit, horticulture, and crop insurance titles. That's infrastructure and community development. That's through the rural development title. Rural development over the last 3 years has given about $5 billion worth of grants and loans to Indian country. And that number is incredibly low considering how large of a portfolio the rural development programs have. And then there's also the research titles, which include not only tribal colleges and universities, the 1862 land grant schools, but that also includes the federally recognized tribes extension program to have folks that go out to tribes to be able to service some of the stuff to be able to service tribal producers who aren't in areas where an 1862 or other land grant programs or extension services reach out to. Then there's the natural resources and conservation, through the conservation and forestry. And then there's also an energy title. The energy title usually has a biomass focus to it in some of those types of programs. There's a nutrition title, and then there's the miscellaneous title, which kind of gets its own space. So with that, that's just sort of a general overview of the Farm Bill, what's in it, why it's important to Indian country. And I think from that, I'll just hand it back to Maria, unless anyone else wants to jump in and add a little bit more to it.
Thanks, Colby. That was a really good update on kind of what the Farm Bill really means. And, you can't underscore how big of a piece of legislation this can be for Indian country, considering how rural our reservations are and how big of an agriculture industry is in Indian country. So like Colby mentioned, the Farm Bill comes up every 5 years or so. And so with these programs expiring in fall of 2018, things could move really quickly, perhaps even in the first quarter of 2018. It goes through the House and the Senate Agriculture Committees, and they've started drafting bills already. The House Agriculture Committee has sent a draft to the Congressional Budget Office to score. So the Congressional Budget Office, as you guys may know, calculates the economic impacts and how much these programs will cost the federal government. And the Farm Bill usually goes through regular order, meaning it goes through the committees add amendments, then it goes to the floor, and then once passed out of one house, it goes to the other house for consideration. And there is a potential for something in the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, and I know our policy director, Denise Desiderio, will be joining us in a minute and would like to discuss that. And Colby, you mentioned the budget and budget reconciliation process. Would you want to discuss that?
Sure, that's no problem. So one of the things we do know is, as Maria mentioned, there is a possibility to try to move the Farm Bill very quick. On the title side of this, like, I think we kind of half-heartedly joke that it's a potential for the 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and potentially further on Farm Bill, as you never quite know. So one of the things we do know is that the budget process and budget reconciliation could come up before they actually go through and finish your Farm Bill. And one of the things that we do know that they're looking to do in in the budget process is to, as the House is calling it, address entitlement reform. And so in addition to Medicaid and Medicare and other types of entitlements, they're also looking at the SNAP program, potentially cutting the SNAP program. The House budget package asked the USDA to cut $10 billion from SNAP over a period of time, even though they recognize that participation is up from 17 to about 44 million participants. Since the last Farm Bill passed, the House has held 20 different hearings or more on the SNAP program and has issued a white paper on it. And so they're looking to sort of maybe structurally change the program. That can mean further budget cuts to it or block grant it to states. And right now, since tribes don't have the ability to be able to manage SNAP, even though that's one of the asks that we've heard from a lot of tribes and are trying to put forward through the coalition, in a situation like that, we don't know what the status with SNAP would be, and we also don't know what would happen with the funding to FDIPR, which is funded out of that. However, if you're also going through the budget process and you were to change the structure of the SNAP program and also lower the funding for it, there's a potential where you could lower the overall baseline of the Farm Bill itself. And so what that means is that for all the other programs for it, that if there are any SNAP savings or cuts to it, they may not be able to shift or use them to support other programs. So the Farm Bill itself, its funding could actually go down substantially just by taking a hack at SNAP in the budget or budget reconciliation process. So that's something that we know will happen in February, March, April of next year, as they're looking to focus on budget. So that's something to keep an eye out for when we're looking at what could happen in the Senate and House and with the Farm Bill in general.
Maria, this is Phil Bakershank. Did you want me to kick in at this point?
Yeah, that sounds great, Phil. Go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to tag along on the Congressional Outlook that Maria and Colby have described to say that the bill obviously is going to occupy a lot of congressional energy over the next year or two, driven by the reauthorization requirement. However, in the past, as veterans of these battles know full well, the Farm Bill has sometimes been simply extended, just like the FAA reauthorization bill has been extended and CHIP and others have been. And so we are anticipating activity in 2018. In fact, 2017 presaged that with the House Ag Committee taking a field hearing tour of rural America, gathering information and ideas, as many of you are aware. On the Senate side, they similarly are gearing up at committee level with various ideas. This is all, however, complicated by the reality of the tax reform contribution to a enlarging deficit, national deficit, and one of the larger so-called entitlement vehicles that contributes to spending money that we don't have revenue to match. Farm Bill, along with Medicare, Medicaid, and sometimes on the chopping block is Social Security. So all of these, particularly SNAP, take it on the chin when the deficit hawks prevail. And so much of the discussion that we've seen that has paralyzed in many respects Congress over tax reform and over CHIP and over FAA and to some extent health reform, all of those, to say nothing of appropriations on the discretionary side, all of those are in the mix, and now we're adding the Farm Bill. So that could mean that this is stalled out, but whether it's stalled out or not, whether it goes through as the chairs of the committee want it to right away in 2018, in fact early, regardless of what its ultimate pace is, we have no excuse in Indian country not to be ready. We have to hurry up, as it were, and then be ready to jump when we have an opening. And so the purpose of this call, and so the purpose of this.
Jackie and President Kiel and I just got back from a conversation with the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs that I think could be really instructive, kind of as we're talking about timing, because we went up there initially to talk about tax and kind of Indian country's well-placed concern, if not anger, about being left out of the recent tax reform bill. It was very understood that we not only expect that to be rectified, but as they go into next year and they're talking about things like infrastructure in the Farm Bill, that we don't want this repeated, that Indian country is coming together and has recommendations, and that we expect to be included in these large pieces of legislation moving forward, any partisan politics aside. So that's how we started our conversation. What they said to us about Farm Bill is that this is now the fast-moving vehicle in the Senate. What they are looking for on the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs is to have a draft done by January 2nd. They're planning on having their first hearing of January being on the Farm Bill and their draft, and that they're anticipating that being around the 17th of January. And they said that actually the Ag Committee is going to be following close behind with their bill and introducing that and having hearings potentially the weeks of the 22nd or the 29th. So I think it's really good timing for us to be having these conversations, but it really emphasized to us that we have very little time, to really start having these conversations. President Kiel was there and reemphasized the importance of this to Indian country. This is a real opportunity for us, not only in those areas that we currently have tribal provisions, but for expanded areas. And because this is not going to be done on budget reconciliation, we think that there will be an opportunity for us to have real policy gains.
Right, and certainly making it more bipartisan. One of the things that we were also talking timing-wise was because we said, well, we'll have tribal leaders here for Executive Council winter session, which is the week of February 12th. And they said, both of their hearing will be done, their piece of the bill will be introduced by then, and certainly the Ag Committee stuff will be in place by then. So at that point, what we'll be doing is trying to, reinforce whatever our asks are, what might not be in the bill, but all of that will be done before then. So we might need to rethink our the timing of our ask. I asked what they did have in the bill or what they were anticipating, and they weren't ready to disclose yet. But they did say that they have taken their recommendations from tribes and from the papers that we've already submitted so far.
And I think the conversations that y'all had last week out at the Intertribal Ag Conference was very instructive as well.
So we're ringing the fire. We are ringing the fire alarm, and that fire alarm tends to go off a lot, but it's already ringing. I think on our agenda we have exhausted the time we had set aside for the Outlook and timing, but for those of you who've joined our webinar, thank you for listening to it. There's a lot of strategy has to happen very quickly, And all of our recommendations on the coalition will be inspired by, if not completely congruent with, the Regaining Our Future study guide, which is a resource that is linkable here. And if you have any trouble getting it, contact any of us and we will show you how to review that Regaining Our Future report. And meanwhile, I want to try to hand the microphone back to Colby, I believe it is, who's due to talk a bit about the nutrition title, which is the one that is most controversial, as we've said, and kind of leads the attention-getting pieces of the Farm Bill, at least initially. And that's why we are today focusing on that in this webinar. Colby? And I believe Janie, if Janie's still on.
Yeah. Yes, I am still on, and I'll take it from here. And thanks, Phil, and everyone at NCAI and Ross. If you could, Maria, bring up the nutrition title basics, and we'll go from there. As Phil indicated, this title could end up being the most contentious title. 80% of the total funding of the entire Farm Bill rests inside this title of the Farm Bill. In 2014, when the immediately previous Farm Bill came up, SNAP was potentially going to be cut. The SNAP cuts did experience $8.6 billion loss in 2014. I apologize for any problems you might have hearing me right now, but I'm going to plow on. It survived a $20 billion cut and actually being removed altogether from the bill. As Colby indicated, the nutrition title is really one of those special places that represents the essence of the rural-urban partnership that's existed for over 40 years, tying all of the other components of the Farm Bill to the nutrition title. And there's a reason for that. And there is strong need by most folks commenting in this area to keep this partnership together in order to improve food access for everyone. It might help if some other folks put their phone on mute for now. It impacts the nutrition title, Maria, to the next slide. It impacts the largest number of people in the U.S., but also in Indian country as well. There are 15 federal food assistance programs. At this point, tribes can manage 3 of those. 25% of all American Indians and Alaska Natives receive some type of food assistance that is usually focused primarily on SNAP, although we have high incidence of usage of the other of the 15 feeding programs across every tribal community. On average, 24% of American Indian and Alaska Native households use SNAP in some form, and that also pertains to the rest of the feeding programs as well. But we got some slides to share with you immediately after this slide that really reflect that in some communities, that number can be double or triple that particular percentage. And then we also have the food distribution program on Indian reservations, which is known by many names. The Dipper is one, commodity food package is another. But the bottom line for that particular program is that 276 tribes and 100 tribal organizations manage that program on behalf of their citizens. If you actually go to the next slide, which is a map of most of the U.S., excluding Alaska, which we do have other slides that we can share with anyone on the phone call about Alaska. But this slide indicates the usage of SNAP in Indian country. All of the maps show 2016 data that we're sharing with you today from the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey, and they show only American Indian and Alaska Native SNAP usage estimates by household. The deep green areas on these maps are areas of especially high usage. The national map shows very high usage rates at a state level for Oklahoma and Arizona specifically. Nearly 30,000 households, American Indian and Alaska Native households in each of these states used SNAP in 2016, but other states of high usage are North Carolina, South Dakota, California, Washington, New Mexico. In these states, it's somewhere between 12 and 16,000 American Indian and Alaska Native households using SNAP in 2016. You can also see the census data at the tribal level, which reveals high usage on reservations and in tribal areas. And that's the next set of slides. This first one shows the Southwest region. And Maria, if you could go to that next slide that shows the Southwest region. Navajo Nation has the highest usage rate on this slide. 14,056 households on the Navajo Reservation used SNAP in 2016. And pockets of moderately high usage can also be seen in many of the Pueblo communities on the map, as well, with SNAP usage ranging from approximately 1,800 to 7,500 households within those communities. You go to the next slide, which is Oklahoma. The map of tribes in Oklahoma shows higher usage for tribes in the eastern part of the state, with the highest percentage in the northeast near Cherokee Nation, where approximately 5,300 households used SNAP in 2016. And if you'll go to the next slide, the map of South Dakota, North Dakota tribes, particularly South Dakota tribes, show usage in the thousands for households on Pine Ridge, Rosebud, Cheyenne River, and Standing Rock reservations. And in some of these places, household usage of SNAP is over half the tribe's total on-reservation population. So overall, the 2016 data, which is reflected in those slides, suggests that SNAP remains a critical part of food assistance for many tribes, even in rural places where SNAP vendors are very hard to come by. And in some places, the usage of SNAP is well above the national rate of 25% overall. The next slide is, it gives you a sense of where the food distribution program on Indian Reservation sites are located as of 2012, and the depth of usage in that particular program, which you can see is pretty scattered across the U.S., but tends to be heaviest in the Southwest region as well. And if you'll go to the next slide, here are some of the issues that we pulled together for the Regaining Our Future report and have been discussed quite a bit. And I'll share with you in what context in just a minute. But participants can only use either a FDIPR, Food Distribution and Indian Reservation Program, or SNAP in any given month. Policy changes such as budget cuts and benefit reductions to SNAP typically result in higher food distribution FDIPR usage rates without any additional funding, which leaves tribal offices with more clients to assist, but no additional resources to do it. We gave you an example on this particular slide of what happened when the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act expired in October of 2013. During that particular act, there was a temporary increase through that act on SNAP benefits. After those benefits or that increase expired, the participation data for selected tribes in FDIPR showed an immediate rise in participation, sometimes by more than 100 new participants at any particular site. And that just causes a lag time to occur within the program itself, because it takes months to, and in some cases up to a year, to recover from the shortage of food or food availability, which occurs when those rapid participation rates occur. If you go to the next slide, the other thing that's been happening that everyone on the call should be aware of, some of you on the call have been actively participating in this, But over the last couple of years, there has been an ongoing effort of a core group of tribal elected officials to sit in a consultation working group with USDA. USDA in the last Farm Bill, actually the not the 2014, but the previous Farm Bill, had the authority to conduct a study to determine the feasibility of tribal management of all of the feeding programs. And that followed on the heels of several resolutions that have come through NCAI over the years of tribal governments expressing interest in taking over the management of those feeding programs. USDA did a study on the feasibility of that, and that study was released. The findings were released in 2016, and generally finding that tribes were very interested and that there would have to be some ramp up of preparation in actually turning those programs over to tribes to manage. But one of the issues that was lacking was clear 638 authority for doing that with regard to the feeding programs writ large. But this consultation working group has been sitting with USDA leadership in the previous administration, and they just met again with the new administration. It was a very positive meeting for those present. And they've been discussing a wide variety of issues that would lead to improvements in the feeding programs in a larger context. Those are listed for you on this particular slide. They have to do with some very specific program requirements that are built into the current authority, but some of which would need to be changed in language in the Farm Bill. Those include eliminating matches, allowing for carryover funding, stopping certain practices that tribal governments have been moving away from anyway, tribal consultation for contingency plans for food shortages or food losses, hiring of national tribal liaisons and regional liaisons, increases in education funding, removing urban place definitions and limitations. All of these can be very specific and need specific language in a Farm Bill to actually address. And then one area that has been very of high focus for many, many tribes around the country is increasing the amount of traditional foods that are purchased and made a part of those food packages, and then also moving away from a national and into a regionally based food delivery system, which could, by definition, include more local and tribally produced foods. So all of those have been a part of this ongoing consultation working group conversation and are teed up for future action in a Farm Bill. If you'll go to the next slide, Maria, the nutrition title issues, I think we've already covered pretty well through both Phil and Denise, Jackie, Maria, and Colby's comments thus far. So I won't go over these particular issues other than to indicate that all of these have potential for surfacing up in a Farm Bill discussion, and each of these issues already has some very specific recommendations involved in our discussions thus far and in the Regaining Our Future report thus far. That's all I have.
Great. Thank you, Janie. That was really informative, and nutrition is a big title to cover in that short of amount of time. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. So there have been some questions that have kind of filtered in throughout the webinar, and we wanted to take some time to answer them. If you do have a question, send it in through the text version on the webinar. Our first question is from Nancy Carnley, and she wants to repeat the dates that Jackie gave.
Oh, okay. This is Denise. So the dates that we heard from the Senate committee today was that the Senate committee themselves plans on having an Indian Farm Bill legislation, a piece of legislation introduced by January 2nd. They're hoping their tentative date right now for a hearing on that is January 17th. They feel like the Ag Committee, the full committee, will probably have a hearing on a draft or have their draft out around the 22nd and 29th and have a hearing very soon thereafter. And that's what we heard about the recent timing that they're planning on the Senate. They made it clear to us today, and we all know that things can change, so nothing's written in stone, but they made it clear that Farm Bill is the next moving bill that they plan on working on. They also think that this will get bipartisan support, which it should. We emphasize that there's no reason for Farm Bill not to get really good bipartisan support, and we're very willing to help them with that.
Great, thank you. One of our next questions is from Amelia Marchand, and she caught one of our typos in the presentation. Our January webinars are on January 8th and January 29th, both on Mondays at 3 p.m. So hopefully you all can join us for those future webinars. And we have another question that I think could be directed towards Chris. Is the coalition only for federally recognized tribes? Chris, would you mind answering?
That's a good question, and it is a question that we within the coalition haven't really directly addressed. We certainly have conceived that the coalition would embrace any Native organization or any tribe, and I know that there are some tribes that are recognized by states, and I see no reason why a tribal entity which is not federally recognized could not join the coalition. I would invite any of my colleagues on the call to weigh in if they have any additional thoughts.
Chris, this is Janie. I do want to make note. USDA program authorities across all of the titles are generally available to federally recognized tribes, state recognized tribes, Native organizations, individuals. So that makes a lot of sense to not restrict that to federally recognized tribes.
All right, thank you. Our next two questions, I think, could be directed to Colby and Janie, and they're about some of the specifics of the data that was presented. We'd like to know, in regards to the data concerning 1 in 5 rural households, does that include reservations as well?
Yes. And,
all right.
And you should, and Maria, please note that the feeding programs reach rural and urban Native populations. They're just accounted for differently. The food distribution on Indian Reservation program can be very tribe specific, so we can get deep into the data on that. The rest of the feeding programs tend to be more focused on county level data, so our team here can pull, and we do pull those kinds of data and can analyze them if anyone has further questions. But rural and urban are possible to follow, so that we can get a deeper understanding for a particular tribe.
Okay, thank you, Janie. The next question is the SNAP increase from 17 to 44 million reflect the time within this current Farm Bill period?
Yes, it does.
All right, thank you. It looks like those are the questions that are pertaining to this subject with nutrition. And another question was, is it possible to send a list of the tribes that have already joined the coalition? And they're on the Native Farm Bill Coalition website, there is a list of the tribes that have sent in their resolutions already. So you guys can take a look there. And we got a number of questions asking the same thing, if they can receive a copy of these slides. And I will be sending out a follow-up email to all people registered for this webinar with a copy of the slides, with a copy of all of the handouts that are part of this webinar. The report that Colby and Janie talked about is on the handout side of this webinar. So if you'd like to download it right now, you can do that. If you'd like to wait for my email, we can do that as well. And NCAI will also be recording this webinar and posting it to our YouTube channel as well. So if you would like to send it along to someone who may have missed it today, the option is out there to do that later on. Just a friendly reminder that we have our 2 additional webinars on January 8th and January 29th. I apologize for that typo there. And if you have questions, you can send them to info@nativefarmbillcoalition.org or to me, Maria Gibbons, at mgivens, G-I-V-E-N-S, @ncai.org. And we actually have NCAI President Jefferson Keel, who's here, and he just wanted to say a few words to all of you while you're on the line.
Well, good afternoon. I hope everyone is thoroughly knowledgeable now of everything that's contained in the Farm Bill, as we all are. Really, I just want to acknowledge and thank all of our Native Farm Bill Coalition partners for working with us so far, particularly the Shakopee, Mdewakanton Sioux community, Tribal Agriculture Council, and the Indigenous Food and Agricultural Initiative out of the University of Arkansas Law School. Janie and Colby, thank you so much for working with us and helping us. Also want to thank all of the tribes that have joined the coalition. We can't do this alone, and you can see how important it is for us to continue to work on this Farm Bill. It is the fast-moving thing out of the Senate now, out of Congress, so we need to be particularly attentive to what's going on. And I walked in as Phil Bakershink was talking. Thank you, Phil, for helping us. We really appreciate that. And everyone else who's involved in this. Once again, thanks a lot.
All right, thank you, Jefferson. And keep a close eye out on your email for all of the information that we'll be following up with. And again, if you have other questions, feel free to reach out to this email or to my email. Thank you, everyone, and have a very happy holiday.